This week on Personally Speaking, our guest is Steven Matz. Steven played for many years as a star pitcher for the New York Mets and now is with the Toronto Blue Jays. A great man and a man of faith. Stay with us. Hello and welcome to Personally Speaking. I'm your host, Msgr Jim Lisante, and Major League Baseball pitcher Steven Matz joins me now. Steven is a pitcher for the Toronto Blue Jays since January of 2021, and he previously played for 6 years for the New York Mets. He's from Long Island, New York, and attended Ward Melville High School in East Setauket, New York. 40 different NCAA Division I schools attempted to recruit Steve to their college teams. The Mets drafted him directly out of high school, and he made his Major League Baseball debut on June 28, 2015, breaking several hitting records in his first start. Steven started the charity initiative True 32, which honors first responders from the New York City Fire Department, New York City Police Department, and the United States military. He's married to Taylor Kane, a country singer, since December 9th, 2017. And during his off-season, Steven and Taylor live in Nashville. Steven speaks openly about his faith, and he's here today with us to talk about that, about his life, his career, his family, his marriage, and the values that matter the most to him. Joining me now, I'm so pleased to welcome to Personally Speaking, Toronto Blue Jays pitcher Steven Matz. Steve Matz is our guest. We're talking to him about life, career, and values. Steve, I want to begin with a quote from another one of our guests that I found interesting. When we had Derek Jeter on the program, he said, I'm a Catholic Christian. I take my faith seriously, but I tend to be very private about it. And I was struck by his comment when I was reading your own, where you said, to me, Jesus is Lord, not just a pie in the sky idea that maybe he's real, maybe he's not. I've seen the transformation of my life. Jesus is the Lord of my life. Steve, where did it come from, the idea of being public in your witness to your faith?
I just think the reality of it for me, it's not, I think the actual truth for me is where it really comes from, is that this is real. God is the creator of everything. And, he wants a relationship with us. And, if I believe that, then, I'm going to try and live that out. And that's going to be reality for me.
Steve, one of the other parts of the conversation with Jeter that I found interesting, as I said, Derek, every American kid wants to be a baseball player, baseball hero. You've got it all, success and popularity and all that and talent. Why would God, of all the people in the world that he could give it to, why would he give it to you? And Jeter said, I don't know, but I'm not going to ask him because I don't want him to change his mind. In the same way, Steve, you've been given many gifts and talents and an amazing player in so many ways. Have you ever examined why God has given you the platform, the opportunity to play ball professionally and to be the person with the talents and gifts that you have?
Yeah, sometimes I think of that. This has been a dream of mine since I was a kid, to play in the major leagues and stuff. And, and sometimes I do have to pinch myself, but at the end of the day, I realize that it is a gift and, I should recognize that and be able to use that and, try to give him some glory with that as well. And so, not really asking why now, but now kind of, what do I do with it?
Right. Now, when you have those gifts and talents, and Dorothy Day, the great social activist, said that all is grace. Everything we have is grace. But when you have that grace, what do you make of it how do you make sense of God's wisdom when you, Steve, have gone through the experience of having this great talent, but also having times when injuries have held you back? How do you take injuries and put them in a spiritual perspective?
Oh, I think, for me, I first, began a relationship with God through an injury is when I had my elbow surgery when I was 19, 20 years old. And that was when I really first come to the faith. And so, when I look at that and I that was, personally a tough time for me. It took me 2 years to come back from elbow surgery. But during that time, I began a relationship with God, and that was when I come to the faith. And so I can look back at that time and be like, hey, even though I was suffering then, it was a really monumental time in my life and for my faith, and really changed the trajectory of my life. And so I look back at that, and then anytime anything else comes up, I realize, it could be made for good.
Steve Matz is our guest with the Toronto Blue Jays. Steve, I want to ask you, when you talk about I came to Christ or I came to my faith, when you were growing up, was faith an important part of your life?
Yeah, it was. I would go to Sunday school and stuff like that, but after I got to a certain age, it was just kind of like that was the end of it. I did my religious duty, and, that was kind of the end of it. And then, I would say there was a point there from, I wasn't going to church. I would say I remember acknowledging the fact that I didn't even believe in God, because he wasn't part of my life at all. And so, you get in this things of the world. And, I remember a friend who was real scientific was trying to explain to me how the world works. And, we're only 15, 16. I remember, yeah, that sounds good. I don't believe in God. And so, when I wasn't living it out, I wasn't pursuing anything. And so it got me to a point where I was like, man, I don't think I believe in God either. Yeah. And so, that was kind of where I was at, in my really, I guess, early mid-teens. And
then wonderfully, through the injury of all things, you came back to a stronger sense of belief. Most weekends, in fact, this past weekend, Steve, I had the opportunity to celebrate 3 weddings. Actually 4, one on Saturday, 2, 3 on Sunday, 1 on Saturday. I mention that because the way I get ready to preach at weddings is I ask the couples to write me an essay on why, of anybody in the world, why is this the one person you think is the best friend you're meant to spend your life with? If you had to put together some thoughts on why is Taylor the one? There are so many choices out there, but you chose Taylor. What does she bring to your life that made you say, this is the person I want to build a life with?
I think the first thing, that really struck me is, her faith and her relationship with God is, it's so cool. I'm from New York. She's from Alabama. We've lived 2 completely different lives, but here she is pursuing the same exact thing that I'm pursuing. And when we come together and recognize that, and I think that was like one of the big things. And, it's just her love for God and how she continues to pursue that, and her love for people as well is really cool.
That's really great. Now, I remember, if I got the timeline correct in my head, Steve, that the year before you guys got seriously involved, that you were dealing with a woman who had some serious life-threatening stuff going on. How did you and she, in terms of faith, handle a very serious thing which might have cost her life?
Yeah, it was a difficult time. She we actually had come back from a mission trip to Honduras, and she ended up getting kidney failure. And we were pretty new in our relationship, and it was really, for me, it was confusing. It was like, what was going on and everything. And for her, I saw her, and she was just steady. She seemed really trusting. That was kind of the best way that, that God was going to work it out. And he ended up, she was completely healed and completely restored back to her health. And so, just to see her faith in that and her trust in that whole situation was pretty amazing.
Steve Matz is our guest. Steve, when I look back on my life in terms of who formed me, who shaped me, I know that my parents are kind of essential to that whole process. In the same way, I wanted to ask you, Lori and Ron, in raising you and your sister and brother, what did your parents do right?
Well, they really gave me a good model for, marriage and family life. We were a pretty close family growing up. Both my parents worked really hard. My dad really modeled what hard work was. And, from, even if it's from working around the house to, going to work every day, he did what he had to do to provide us with everything we needed. And so I look at that, and I'm just extremely grateful to have parents like them.
Isn't that great that they're a real model for you? Let me ask you this too, in terms of, I have a good friend, Mike Komisarek, played professional hockey. But he said to me recently, we were out to lunch, and he said, from the time I was 6, hockey was my life. And now he's mid-30s and just retired. And he said, I'm not sure what the rest of life holds. When you've been as devoted to baseball as you have, I mean, it's from the earliest time of your life, you've been playing and playing well. How do you plan for the life journey beyond baseball?
For me, that's something that the wheels are always kind of turning, is I understand, baseball is a sport where, mid-30s, if you can make it to your mid-30s, that's a really long career. And so, here you are, you're, done with your career in your mid-30s. So for me, the wheels are always turning of what's life going to look like after baseball, family, work, that type of stuff. And so I don't quite know what that's going to look like yet, but it is, it is something that's really intriguing to me and really exciting to me as well.
Steve Matz had talked earlier in an interview about one time thinking about being a firefighter. Would the body be able to take that work now if you move into that next?
That was something I would think about a lot, and it's still, kind of is in the back of my mind a little bit, but, being away from home this much and then maybe working those shifts, I don't know, I don't know how that would go. It'd be more something maybe a little more consistent, but, we'll see. We'll see where life takes.
One of I got actually arrested years ago. I was at a pro-life demonstration and I got arrested with a guy named Mark Bavaro, football player from the Giants. But I mentioned that because what Mark used to do when he would catch a football touchdown is he would genuflect and he'd say a prayer. I mentioned that too because the Sports Illustrated had an editorial back then saying, Mr. Bavaro, we're happy you have faith, but keep it to yourself. Do you run into any kind of blowback for being a man of faith who is pretty upfront about it?
I really haven't. I haven't had a ton, at least out in the open, where people actually, confront me about it. I haven't had a ton of blowback about it, thankfully, other than, maybe just a little bit here and there, but really nothing too big.
Well, speaking of criticism, when you go on Wikipedia and you look up Steve Matz, there's like pages and pages and pages of articles because there's so much coverage for guys in professional sports. Steve, if I give a homily on Sunday in my church and 100 people like it, but one person at the back door says, I think that homily stunk, I'm going to focus for the rest of the day on that criticism. I mention that because, how do you handle the fact that there's a whole lot of people out there who love you and love the way you play, but you can't be in baseball and not have somebody out there not liking you for some reason or another? What does Steve Matz do with criticism?
It's tough because I think naturally, or maybe we all are to some degree, we want people to like us, and that was something, obviously being in New York for early part of my career, it's a very loyal fan base. And when you do good, they love you. When you don't do good, they want the next guy in. And so I've had kind of ups and downs in that career, and I remember being booed off the field, specifically in 2017. I was like, man, I hear my home crowd booing me, I'm from this area and, I'm just trying to do good. And, that's where my faith really comes in play is where, for me, Ecclesiastes, sometimes I read that and it really helps me, this is just meaningless at the end of the day. We got a God in heaven who cares more about than just, a game on the field and stuff. So, that's really where I would say I draw that type of stuff. And I try not to read it. That helps too.
I should say for our listeners and watchers around the world that I'm doing this interview from Long Island. Steve is from Long Island. There is a passionate loyalty either to the Yankees or to the Mets. And in particular, maybe because the Mets have had their bumps along the way, there's a deep version of loyalty by Mets fans. So I just wondered how heartbreaking it must have been for some of them when you moved on because you're their own, a Long Island guy and a Mets guy. But you handled criticism pretty well. At least that's my sense of it. And anyway, Steve Matz, for the people who don't know him well, has been one of these rare and wonderful people who decided that he's been very blessed. He's been given a lot of opportunities, but he wants to give back. So I want to talk a little bit about those, Steve. First of all, what goes into your decision to actively be a guy involved in charity? I was intrigued by a couple of things. What was your connection to helping people in Honduras?
So, it's pretty cool. I got connected with my agency and, he's very like-minded. He's a believer as well, and he wants to give back where he can. And he wants to utilize the athletes that want to give back as well, and kind of collaborate there. And so he was the first one that was like, "Hey, we're going on a mission trip, where we want to bring guys if you want to come." So me and Taylor were like, "Yeah, let's do it." And so that was just a simple connection there. And it was a one-time thing. She got pretty sick, so we're like, okay, we're going to hold off on the maybe going to different places for now. But as far as some of the other charity stuff, after my first year, I got to pitch in the World Series, and that next spring training, I sat down with my agent and was just like, all right, what are some areas where, we want to give back,
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, all right, well, I really appreciate kind of blue collar work. And so we looked into, police, military, firefighter. We're like, okay, that could be something there. Okay. Little league, giving back to some little leagues in the area, that could be something there. And there was another thing that I got connected with called Angela's House. It's a charity out on Long Island. They help disabled families who, whether they need a ramp for their house, or just supporting families who have disabled kids of any kind. And so those were kind of three areas that initially we started in that first season. And the first responders, police, military, fighter, that one really took on a life of its own. We would invite them out to a game. I would meet them, sign stuff for them. And then it kept expanding, and we started having some events, raising some money. And then we were getting some scholarships for kids who lost their parents in the line of duty and supporting them any way we could. So it was just kind of cool. It was just like when you make yourself available, and it just kind of took on a life of its own. So that was pretty cool.
Steve Matz, through True 32, his particular arm of charity has taken under his wings concern, as he mentioned, for firefighters and police officers and U.S. military. Now, Steve, that's an interesting thing because, as you know, these guys and gals are particularly subject to a lot of criticism in recent years. I'm from a parish that's largely guys who are police and firefighters, so I feel personally very protective of them. What do you make of it when you care about their welfare and the fact that they put themselves on the front line, and yet they come up with some pretty wicked criticism? And the comparison I often make is, there are about 4% of priests in the Catholic Church who've done bad things, but there's 96% of us who have not. And yet we're all tarred by that brush. And I feel like with the police and firefighters and the guys in the military, they are wonderful people, but boy, they're getting beaten up. How do you make sense of that?
Yeah, it's tough because, you see a lot of the media coverage and, some of that negative stuff, and it paints, like you said, just that broad brush. But, when you talk to these guys and they see that, they are the ones that are protecting our communities at the end of the day. And, for military, you can even go back to, look at the Vietnam days when those guys were underappreciated. And when you just show them their appreciation for the work that they do, I think it goes a long way to them, and for the guys that are doing it right and doing, and supporting our communities and our country, and the first responders being there on 9/11 in the piles, seeing that, just to show them, hey, we appreciate what you're doing. I think that just goes a long way. And, that's I think that's all we can do,
Yeah. Steve Matz is our guest. Steve, even people who come to church regularly, sometimes, and you know this because you've been in churches enough, they'll have a sense of, I'm kind of doing what I need to do in terms of punching my card and being there. But we often talk in church about it doesn't mean anything until you enter into a personal relationship, a personal encounter with Christ. Some folks really with the best of intentions say, I do all the things I'm supposed to do, but I don't get this whole concept of personal encounter or personal relationship. I don't know how to do it. So having gone through that process of being a nominal Christian first and then having a more personal relationship with Jesus, is there a particular way or other things to do that you found are an effective way of growing that relationship with the man?
Yeah, I think there's several different things, to just grow the relationship. One thing is living in community. I notice when I'm in community with other believers, whether it's, my roommate here, people that I can talk on the phone, there's several good ministries in baseball, discipleship ministries, having that communication, talking about your faith, talking about life, what you're going through. I think that's like what I've noticed over the years is like the biggest thing is like, we need each other. We need to lean on each other. We need accountability in our faith and our walk with God. I think that's that's the biggest thing.
Okay. The experience of being on the road, I want to talk about that for a minute, Steve. You're up there with Toronto now. No matter what team you're with, you're traveling constantly. Your wonderful wife, Taylor, is, I understand, based in Nashville. How do you keep personal relations going, whether it's with your family on Long Island or your wife in Nashville or your closest friends when you're a guy on the road?
Yeah, it's tough. I think, thankful for technology. If it wasn't for the phones, it'd be, me and Taylor would hardly ever talk. So I'm thankful for that. I got to be really intentional about it, make time. Sometimes it's always not fun just kind of sitting there talking on the phone all the time, but, you really got to be intentional and realize that's an important part of your relationship. And so I think that's the biggest thing is, making time for that and being intentional about that time. Even though it's just talking on the phone, it's still really important.
Hey, Steve, remember before I said to you, if you had to be writing an essay about why Taylor, you came up with some wonderful answers. If I had Taylor here and I said, why Steve, what might she say?
I think she would say the same thing. I think she would say, I just think it's so cool. Here she is doing her thing. I'm over here. But like I said, we're both just pursuing our relationships with God. And I think that's just really cool.
There's an actress, Kristen Chenoweth, and she had a great relationship with a guy, but he was not of our faith. And I asked her, I said, could you marry someone for whom Jesus didn't mean anything? And she said, I really don't think I could. It'd be missing a big part of my life. Is the fact that both of you believe in God an important part of the relationship?
Yeah, I would say, that's number one. I mean, like that's a lot of our conversation is like what we're going through and, what we're reading in the Bible and, different people that we're praying for, so I think that's number one for us.
When you said before, Steve, about the fact that if you in baseball make it into your mid-30s, that's a good career. The aging thing, whether you're an actor or an athlete, has got to be a constant pressure that every year is important. How well or how not so well has Steve Matz managed to deal with the reality of aging and our bodies changing and taking it and accepting it in perspective? How good are you at doing that, Steve?
I think I'm learning as we go here. Now that I'm 30, it's like, wow, it's just going by so fast. And last year I had a really bad year, worst of my career. And I was like, man, this thing could be, and, this whole baseball thing could be gone in a flash, and then it was pretty humbling. And so I think it does shift things in perspective. I was like, am I really really believing that? Or am I is it just kind of lip service, when your career could be ended, in one bad season, that type of thing. So I think it does shift things in perspective and definitely learning as we go with that.
And speaking of perspective, Steve, when you just said you were 30 this year, I was resentful and jealous and I want your life. Everything's important depending on where you are in that moment of life for yourself. Steve Matz is our guest. Steve, a few years back, we had a guy named George Martin as our guest. He had played with the football team, the Giants. But I mentioned that because now he does financial planning for athletes. And one of the things he said that was troubling was that so many of the guys at the end of their professional athletic careers don't have the money that they made, that it's been squandered badly. When I first saw that in your first year, you got this great contract, and I thought to myself, this kid from Long Island whose parents worked hard, he worked hard for every dollar he ever made. Now suddenly they're waving lots of money in front of you. How do you put in perspective the power of money in sports? And how do you make sure you don't end up like some of those people that George Martin talked about, where you say, what happened to it all? How do you handle money?
Yeah, I think, a big thing for me is, recognizing, you can do a lot of good with money. And so it's like, whose kingdom do I want to build? Do I want to build my kingdom or do I want to build God's kingdom? And so, I think my dad, I was only 18 years old. I was really thankful I had a dad that, was like, you know what, we're going to be really smart with this. We put it away right away. For 5 years, I pretty much couldn't even touch it. Yeah. And then, now I have financial advisors and stuff. And, I got those principles from my family and stuff. And recognizing the good that you can do with it. I think all those things combined, and you want to be a good steward of what you've been given. So I think that's the biggest thing is stewardship.
Absolutely. Often enough, people in my parish will say, is it a sin to have money? I said, no, because you can do good things with it. You can use it for a great purpose and stuff, but it all depends on how you're spending it. Steve Matz, I want to thank you for being with us. I'm so grateful for your open conversation, your honesty, and especially, to find a guy who's a public figure, but also unafraid of saying, I belong with the man. Jesus is important to me. My faith is central to who I am and motivates so much of what I do in my life. That openness, that willingness to share it is a great gift, more than you know, to so many people. And I'm just so grateful. I wish you every success in baseball, but I think even more importantly, what you do with your life is so richly blessed by the fact that you're loved by many people. When I mentioned to my nephew, Matthew, you were coming on, he said, everybody agrees. He's such a good man. He's such a nice human being. And I have to believe a lot of that is rooted in the family that raised you and in the God that surrounds you. So keep on keeping on. And thank you so much, Steve, for sharing with us.
All right. Thank you very much.
As we end today's program, I want to thank you all for being with us. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach me at personallyspeakingpodcast@gmail.com. To go see past episodes of our show, go to YouTube and search under Personally Speaking with Msgr Jim Lisante. And don't forget to click like and subscribe. Personally Speaking is also available as a podcast on personallyspeakingpodcast.buzzsprout.com. Or for past shows, go to www.closeencountertv.com. And again, click on the radio button at the top of the page. You can also get our shows at www.ollmp.org. And also get a weekly homily from Msgr Jim. Personally Speaking is also on Facebook at Personally Speaking with Msgr Jim Lisante. And we're also now on Instagram at Personally Speaking Podcast. Personally Speaking is made possible because of the support of so many of you. Thank you for your help and support. I'm privileged to serve as host and executive producer of Personally Speaking. Our producer is Lisa Jandovitz. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be with you again next time on Personally Speaking.